My name is Evelyn Hart. I'm 29 years old. I live in a quiet neighborhood in an ordinary apartment. I'm a teacher, and most of my days are filled with classes, books, and little routines. The safest part of my life was always my home. It was my sanctuary, my space. But then I realized my worst nightmare lived right next door. And from that moment on, everything changed. Neighbors are supposed to make you feel safe, right? But the man next door, Mark, watched me every single day. At first, I thought it was coincidence taking the trash out at the same time, checking the mailbox together. But then the text started, "That red dress looked amazing on you. I had only worn that dress inside my home." So how did he know? One night, I woke up to a new message glowing on my phone. "I know you're awake right now." My heart pounded. I pulled the curtains back, but the street was silent. Then I realized the small lamp in my living room was still on. From outside, he could see everything. But the next morning, when I bumped into him, he smiled and casually asked, "Did you sleep well?" That was more terrifying than the text. I thought about going to the police, but I had no proof. The text, yes, but the number was unregistered. That's when it hit me. Mark was playing a game, leaving no trace. So I decided to play mine. I set up a camera facing my living room. First night, nothing. Second night, nothing. Third night, a shadow passed outside my window, then vanished. But the recording didn't capture his face. What filled me wasn't fear anymore, it was rage. One afternoon, there was a knock on the door. I opened it. Mark stood there with a box of cupcakes. "A little neighborly gift," he said, smiling. I didn't invite him in, but when I glanced at the box, I saw a small note taped to the lid. "Don't forget to turn off your lamp at night." My blood ran cold. He hadn't written that by accident. He wanted me to see it. It was a challenge. That night, I set up another camera, this time facing the hallway. At 2:47 a.m., there was a faint rattle. The next morning, I checked the footage. The door handle trembled, slowly turning. Someone had tried to get in, but failed. The lock held. But the most chilling part? A glimpse of sneakers in the doorway. The same gray trainers Mark wore every single day. Now I had proof. And it was my turn to make a move. I was desperate to go to the police, but the footage wasn't enough. His face was never visible. Evidence, yes, but debatable. So I chose another path. I typed a fake text, making it look like it was meant for someone else. "We'll catch him tonight. Camera is ready." Then I accidentally sent it straight to Mark. That night, as he passed my window, he turned his face directly toward the camera almost defiantly. But this time I had his face. Exactly what I wanted. But the next morning, another surprise awaited me. The camera's memory card was gone. Someone had been inside. I searched the house in panic. Nothing else was missing, only the card. That told me two things. One, Mark was getting bolder. Two, I was in more danger than I had realized. Because he wasn't just watching me anymore. He was entering my home. That night, I didn't sleep. I sat by the door with a frying pan in hand, eyes fixed on the lock. Hours passed, nothing. By morning, I was shaking with anger. Then I checked the mailbox. Inside was a small envelope. I opened it. A photo slipped out. A photo of me asleep in my bed. My throat closed. He had entered my room while I was there. This wasn't just surveillance anymore, it was a power play. But what he didn't realize was this: by giving me that photo, he made his first mistake. I decided to take the envelope to the police, but they told me the photo wasn't enough evidence. Yes, it was creepy, but without context, it could be dismissed. Rage boiled inside me. When I got home, I found a new note taped to my window. "The police is a waste of time." He was openly taunting me now. And in that moment, I made my choice. If the police couldn't catch him, I would find my own way. I set my own trap. This time, I placed a visible camera in plain sight inside the house, but hid smaller cameras in the corners. He would think he'd outsmarted me by stealing the obvious one. And just as I predicted, it worked. Around midnight, the door creaked open. Footsteps filled the hallway. He grabbed the visible camera, smirked at the lens, and pocketed it. What he didn't realize was a tiny camera in the ceiling corner was capturing everything. Not just his face now, but the exact moment he entered my home. The next day, Mark knocked on my door. This time he brought flowers. With a smile, he said, "Better hide your camera next time, neighbor. Safety is important." Anger flared inside me, but I hid it. I nodded, thanked him, closed the door, then immediately pulled up the footage from the hidden camera. Watching him steal the camera with his own hands and step into my home. This time, the evidence was undeniable. I went back to the police. This time, the officer's expression changed. "This is a serious violation," he said. They reviewed the footage, filed a report. But then he added a warning. "Do not provoke him. He could be dangerous." On the way home, I thought about that. Maybe they were right, maybe Mark truly was dangerous. But inside, a louder voice whispered, "You're going to beat him at his own game." That night, when I came home, there was a package on my doorstep. Inside was a brand new camera. A note was taped to it. "Consider this compensation for the broken one." My blood ran cold. Even after the police report, he was still taunting me. But the irony was perfect. The very camera he delivered would become the one to record his downfall. I set up the new camera by the door in plain sight. Mark thought he'd won again. But secretly, I had set a bigger trap. Small cameras hidden throughout the building's hallway. Now it wasn't just my home, I had eyes on the whole corridor. And the very first night, I caught him. Stepping out of his door, pulling out his phone, sending me a message. On the footage, both his face and the phone screen were visible. The exact moment the text appeared on my phone. A perfect match. The next morning, I invited some neighbors over. Served them tea, made small talk. Then I opened my laptop. "I want to show you something," I said. The screen filled with footage of Mark, phone in hand, sending me a text. The room fell silent, air frozen. Neighbors exchanged looks as the door creaked open. And Mark walked in. He froze. His own face stared back at him from the screen. The silence was so heavy, breathing itself felt like a crime. Mark let out something between a laugh and a choke. "This is fake," he shouted, hands trembling. But one of my neighbors whispered, "Those shoes, he wears them every day." A murmur spread through the room. Mark yelled, trying to silence everyone, but the panic in his eyes betrayed him. In that moment, I realized sometimes the truth doesn't need proof. Fear exposes itself. After the neighbors left, Mark knocked on my door. His voice was lower now. "Why are you doing this? Your neighbors won't trust you anymore." But I simply opened my phone and played a new clip him trying to turn my doorknob. His face went white. "Delete it?" he whispered. But all I could think was, I'm the one in control now. The next day, there was a new note in my mailbox. "You can't silence me." But this time, I noticed fingerprints smudged on the paper. I took the evidence straight to the police. If the prints matched, denial would be impossible. But then came the twist I didn't expect. The officer said, "We already had a complaint on him. Your file will be additional evidence." Mark hadn't just targeted me. He had haunted others too. The war had turned public now. At midnight, Mark shouted outside my window, I'll tell everyone the truth about you. Lights switched on across the building, curtains pulled back. Everyone saw him screaming, threatening. The next day, the building held a meeting. For the first time, I wasn't alone. Everyone was on my side. But the biggest shock came when a young woman stood up quietly and said, "I'm a victim too." Her story silenced the room. Months earlier, Mark had stalked her too, but without evidence, she hadn't spoken up. Now, my recordings validated her words. The stares turned toward Mark. I wasn't alone. None of us were. What I felt wasn't rage anymore, but something colder, stronger, the justice of being believed. And Mark's expression? For the first time, it was the face of a man who knew he'd lost. After the building meeting, Mark disappeared for a few days. The silence felt like peace, but deep inside, I was uneasy. Then one night I found a new envelope in my mailbox. Inside, a single sentence, "It's not over." But this time, I wasn't afraid. Because I wasn't alone anymore. The whole building stood behind me. And more importantly, the police investigation was speeding up. The police called me. The fingerprints matched. The ones on the notes belonged to Mark. This was the kind of evidence that could take him to court. But the real shock? The file didn't just include my complaint and the young woman's. 2 other buildings had reported him before for the same kind of harassment. That's when I realized we were just the tip of the iceberg. Mark had been tormenting people for years. When Mark returned, he saw that the entire building had turned their backs on him. No greetings, no eye contact. Yet he still played his role. Smiling, he told me, "They're just jealous." As if he still believed he could manipulate me. But the only answer I gave was pulling a flash drive from my bag. It contained everything: recordings, texts, photos. "You'll watch these in court," I said. For the first time, he had no words. On the day of the trial, the courtroom was packed. Neighbors, officers, even the young woman were there. Mark tried to deny everything from the stand. "This is a conspiracy against me," he shouted. But when the judge reviewed the evidence videos, texts, fingerprints, the only voice left in the room was Mark's own. And in that silence, his downfall was deafening. When the judge gave the verdict, everyone exhaled. Mark was issued a restraining order, a criminal record, and eviction from the building. The neighbors clapped, but I stayed quiet. Because this revenge didn't feel like victory, it felt like a lesson. Even the person closest to you can become a threat. But in the end, darkness always gets exposed by light. It was moving day. The truck was parked outside while neighbors watched from their windows. Once, he had walked these streets with pride. Now his head hung low. As he carried his boxes, his eyes met mine. For a moment, it looked like he wanted to speak, but I closed the door. Words no longer mattered for him. When his apartment was finally empty, a new silence fell. No more rattling doorknobs, no more threats in my mailbox. At night, I could turn off the lamp and still sleep soundly. For the first time, silence meant peace. But deep down, I knew this wasn't just my victory. It was a victory for every neighbor, every victim he had ever haunted. We held a small gathering with the neighbors. Tea, cookies, laughter. But in everyone's eyes, there was the same expression: relief. One woman leaned in quietly and whispered, "If it weren't for you, we'd still be living in fear." That's when I realized revenge isn't always just personal. Sometimes it sparks courage in others too. One evening, I looked out my window. Mark's apartment was dark, empty, an abandoned space. But to me, that emptiness was more powerful than any victory. Because it meant the end of an era, the closing of a chapter, and the start of a new one in my life. Looking back now, what I lived through may look like revenge, but in truth, it was freedom. Mark had wanted to scare me, silence me, isolate me. But in the end, he was exposed in front of everyone. And I learned, no matter how powerful darkness pretends to be, it always gets caught in the light. They say revenge is sweet. But for me, the sweetest thing was simply breathing freely again. If you like this video, please comment and subscribe.